come today to explain my vote yesterday for voting against the motion to proceed on this bill.
Earlier this summer, North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis made waves when he gave an impassioned speech on the Senate floor. It was a rebuke of the massive tax and spending package making its way through Congress. The, quote, one big beautiful bill.
So what do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore?
The bill included new rules for Medicaid and how it's funded. And for Tillis, that was a deal breaker. The senator was one of the few Republicans who voted against the bill. And he unexpectedly announced his retirement from public service shortly afterward.
And I want to the people of North Carolina to withhold my affirmative vote until it's done.
But that didn't stop the bill from becoming law. Now, dozens of states, including North Carolina, must figure out how to keep a vital slice of their healthcare systems intact before it's too late. And in Tillis's home state, one group of healthcare providers might just be the canary in the coal mine.
Rural healthcare in North Carolina is in some serious trouble.
If they lose Medicaid, life is over.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. This is The Broadside, where we tell stories from our home at the crossroads of the South. This week, the fight to salvage Medicaid expansion and what this all means for the future of rural health care.
Our public schools are a place where all kids feel like they belong.
My children.
My family. My community.
All students. All students.
All students belong in a great public school.
Let's get ready for back to school at nea.org/backtoschool.
I'm Nick Canal, and I'm a reporter and host for WFAE.
Nick's been at Charlotte's public radio station for more than a decade. And during that entire time, he says Medicaid has been at the heart of North Carolina politics. More specifically, Medicaid expansion.
Especially under Governor Roy Cooper, who was really pushing for the state to expand Medicaid. But Republican lawmakers in the state House and Senate were really reluctant.
The crux of the debate went something like this. About a decade ago, the Affordable Care Act gave individual states the option to expand eligibility for Medicaid. If a state signed up for expansion, then in theory, more people would receive health insurance. And more money would then flow into hospitals with all these newly insured patients.
It gets more people covered. It makes people healthier. It uses tax dollars.
In North Carolina, Democrats like former Governor Roy Cooper consistently beat the drum in its favor.
Let's make a deal. Let's get this done.
And to sweeten the deal, if states opted in, the federal government agreed to pay for most of the costs that came with expansion. But despite these incentives, it wasn't an easy sell. Fiscal conservatives in North Carolina remained skeptical.
Because they had this fear that, yes, the federal government is offering a great deal right now, saying that they're going to cover 90% of the costs for Medicaid expansion. But what if that changes in the future? And then, the state's on the hook for the rest of these costs. So there was a lot of debate, a lot of resistance.
Lawmakers in Raleigh today, but they say that they still don't have any deal on this and may not for months, actually. Capitol reporter.
But finally, after years of back and forth, North Carolina signed up for Medicaid expansion in 2023. Today, 40 states and D.C. have chosen to expand Medicaid. But what makes North Carolina stand out is how they made it happen.
Rare bipartisan agreement as Republicans join Democrats in North Carolina to expand Medicaid.
After a decade of debate, expansion to Medicaid could be coming to North Carolina. State House and Senate leaders announcing an agreement today.
It will allow
So Republicans came on board, and it was a big bipartisan moment when Democrats and Republicans in the state legislature came together. They voted to expand Medicaid.
But there was a key component that secured many state Republicans' support. North Carolina's Medicaid expansion was paired with a trigger law. It stipulates that zero funds from the general state budget can go into expansion.
Because if they do, Medicaid expansion ends automatically.
The entire program goes away. Even though it's only been a couple years, the results have been pretty impressive. Since expanding coverage, more than 680,000 North Carolinians have signed up for Medicaid. And a lot of those new enrollees are in rural areas.
About 35%, so more than a third, are from rural counties in North Carolina.
That's a big deal for the state, considering North Carolina has the second highest rural population in the country. And this influx has paid off for hospitals, too.
So before Medicaid expansion, a lot of rural hospitals were sort of in real financial straits. And between 2005 and 2023, so when the state expanded Medicaid, there were 12 rural hospitals that closed or got rid of inpatient care. Since Medicaid was expanded, that number's been 0.
But now, some of the rules around Medicaid are set to change, thanks to the tax and spending bill signed into federal law earlier this year. Nick recently reported on these changes and what it all means for Medicaid in North Carolina. So why is Medicaid at risk in North Carolina? Can you break it down for us?
Yes, I absolutely can, and I will try to do it in the simplest way possible because I know that health policy is just like a huge tangled mess of confusing policy stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
So really, there's kind of like two big things happening right now, two big reasons why Medicaid expansion is sort of at risk in North Carolina. The first one are these new work requirements that were included in the Republican tax and spending law, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill. So starting January 1st, 2027, the law requires North Carolina to add these new work reporting rules for expansion adults.
This new work requirement means some people who previously qualified for Medicaid will be kicked off their health insurance. Estimates from state health officials put it around 255,000 North Carolinians. Meanwhile, Nick says implementing the work requirement is also going to demand a lot more from the state.
That means the state is going to need to build new computer systems, hire staff, they need to monitor eligibility a lot more often, and so all of that costs money. It could be like tens of millions of dollars a year.
Basically, it's a big administrative overhaul. And health experts warn that if there's a delay or problems during its rollout, then people could be at risk of losing coverage even if they're qualified. So that's the first big change. The second change is with a tax on hospitals, something most states use to help pay for Medicaid expansion.
Right now, North Carolina hospitals pay about 6% of their revenue into a state tax. And that basically covers all of the state's share of Medicaid expansion. And for every $1 that the hospitals put in, the federal government matches that with $9. So the tax and spending law is going to cut that hospital tax almost by half.
That cut won't come all at once. The new law lowers the provider tax bit by bit over several years. Nevertheless,
that means that there is going to be a lot less money overall, even coming from the federal government. And so state officials have said this could cost the state something like $50 billion.
Wow.
And so the question there is, how do you keep the program running when there's so much less money coming in?
It's an important question, especially for rural hospitals and clinics operating on a thin margin already. With these changes, Nick says they're likely to face a tough future.
They probably will face some real significant financial strain. And I think that what you can say for sure is that you probably are not going to see any new rural hospitals opening up. And you got to remember, too, that when a rural hospital closes, it doesn't just affect, the people with Medicaid, but that affects an entire community and also an employment base, people who work there.
And for your reporting, you talked with some rural providers. Can you tell me about your trip to Henderson, North Carolina, and who you talked to?
Yes. So there was one family physician I spoke to who worked in Henderson, North Carolina, which is just kind of south of the Virginia border.
My name is Laura Uchik. I'm a family medicine doctor. I work at Rural Health Group, which is a federally qualified health center in Henderson.
And, I asked her who was she most worried about.
the type 1 diabetics, patients who have type 1 diabetes who are so young. And if they lose Medicaid, life is over. Like, it's just over. Like, they're not going to make it to 30. There's no way.
She said that she had patients before Medicaid expansion who had lost their lives. I mean, people in their 20s or 30s with type 1 diabetes who died just because they weren't able to access care. So she said that was a real risk.
What about possible lifelines for rural hospitals? There's a federal rural health fund that's supposed to help with some of the losses these hospitals are anticipating.
Yes. So in the Republican tax and spending law, there is $50 billion that has been set aside for rural hospitals because Republicans kind of anticipated that this might have some negative effects. However, a lot of health advocates have said that is not nearly enough. Remember, the state of North Carolina is anticipating that we might lose $50 billion just over the next decade, and we're just one state. So will $50 billion for the whole country really fill that gap?
Yeah, seems like a Band-Aid rather than an actual solution.
That's what some health advocates have argued, certainly.
Now, with the new rules on the way, the ball is in the court of state lawmakers, who have to figure out how to continue funding Medicaid expansion. And remember, because of the trigger clause, they can't pay for it with general state funds.
The big deadline is January 1st, 2027, which is when the new work requirements are supposed to take place. Now, if the state can't come up with a way to pay for those new work requirements by that date, that could be the end of Medicaid expansion in North Carolina. And, I mean, you'll see effects pretty immediately.
So, no pressure, right? More on that after a short break. Between doom scrolling and the social media fire hose, it's easy to feel lost or overwhelmed these days. Masterclass offers something refreshing and completely different, with more than 200 classes taught by the world's best artists and thought leaders. I recently checked out a cooking lesson by Sola El-Waili on breakfast foods, because I'm a brunch girly. And there's so much more. Get to the bottom of our messy socio-political moment with scholars like Noam Chomsky. Add crucial context to the news cycle with historian Doris Kearns-Goodwin. Or accelerate your career with entrepreneurs like Mark Cuban. And right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/broadside. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/broadside. masterclass.com/broadside. If you walked into Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center back in the late 2000s, you might have actually crossed paths with Donny Lambeth.
There were some nights I would just go sit in the emergency room and talk to people, and they didn't always know who I was.
He wasn't a doctor or a patient. No, he was president of the hospital, one of the biggest in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So what was Lambeth doing in the waiting room?
I was trying to understand, so why do people come to the emergency room? Why is our emergency rooms so full of people that really didn't need emergent care?
The main reason, he says, because they couldn't afford health insurance. And at the emergency room,
you can't turn them away. You can't even ask them for money to pay their bill up front. You pretty much treat them. And even if you don't have insurance, you can go to some of the best doctors in America right here in our emergency rooms.
Lambeth says this wasn't just a problem in Winston-Salem. He saw the same scenario play out nearly everywhere. And it often led to expensive, unpaid medical bills.
I have seen a lot in healthcare, and that was one of the reasons I was recruited to come to the General Assembly, is to work on financing of healthcare.
After a long career as a hospital administrator, Lambeth jumped from healthcare over to politics. Since 2013, he's been a state representative for East Forsyth County. Today, as a co-chair for the House Health Committee, he's an influential voice in state health policy. And from the get-go, Medicaid expansion was a top priority for the Republican.
I know the Medicaid expansion was not a popular topic for me as a Republican, but I saw it firsthand, and I saw how it could help so many people in North Carolina. And, of course, you know that was a long journey. I took a lot of criticism.
But Lambeth barreled through and finally helped get expansion over the finish line in 2023. And the Herculean effort it took to make it happen isn't lost on him.
Not only did we do the expansion, but we did it with a Democrat governor and a Republican General Assembly, which made it a very unique situation.
But now, his crowning achievement has another hurdle in front of it.
The work requirement is now a reality, and we'll have to take some of those individuals off the Medicaid expansion rolls. So some folks will lose coverage by the nature of they're qualified, but they're not working.
Lambeth says the last thing he wants to see is uninsured people returning to ERs.
They're just going to return back to the state's emergency rooms, and that's the worst place for primary care. You go in there with a headache, guess what? They're going to put you through the MRI scanner to make sure you don't have a tumor. I mean, that's just the nature of defensive medicine. But I guarantee you, you go into an emergency room anywhere in the state and you tell them you've had severe headaches, they're going to put you right in one of those $10,000 scans.
And in that scenario, nobody wins, according to Lambeth. We're back to square one, where lots of uninsured patients won't be able to afford an expensive ER bill, and hospitals will have to take on the cost. A 2015 study from the National Bureau of Economic Research estimated that every uninsured person costs local hospitals around $900 in uncompensated care each year. So Lambeth is scrambling to find ways to cover the estimated 255,000 newly uninsured North Carolinians. But he's wary of the trigger law, the compromise that got many of his fellow Republicans on board with Medicaid expansion in the first place. Again, if the state funds even part of Medicaid expansion from the general state budget, the entire program will end. So, as a way to keep these people insured, Lambeth is looking into alternatives to Medicaid.
I've talked to some insurance companies about writing a policy that might be offered to those individuals that would be a, quote, a low-cost policy, and it might cover some limited services, i.e. wellness care, going to the primary care doctor. So that's something we're trying to figure out. Is there a way to take care of those 150, 200,000 people that would drop off?
It's a delicate balancing act, figuring out how to implement the work requirement and keeping as many people insured as possible, all without dipping into general state funds and tripping the trigger clause, something Lambeth says is pretty much set in stone.
I don't think there's much of an appetite to step in and fund additional Medicaid-covered lives. I cannot, under any scenario, imagine the state would step in. I would not recommend the state step in and fill that gap or hole.
It's a really difficult situation because all these people have gotten health coverage because of it.
This is reporter Nick de la Canal again. For people trying to assess the fallout, he says all eyes are on rural health care.
And a lot of these people in rural counties, and politically, it might not be a great move to take away health coverage from people. That can make a lot of people angry. So it puts them in a really difficult spot.
I do worry that a lot of these people in rural areas, the rural areas are getting hit hard. Rural healthcare in North Carolina is in some serious trouble.
We know that Governor Josh Stein has said that there are five rural hospitals in particular that could be at risk of closing. He was drawing from a study that was done that kind of looked at hospitals around the nation and what their financial status is, how much money they're bringing in from Medicaid expansion. I did reach out to one of those hospitals, Blue Ridge Regional in Spruce Pine, and I was trying to reach out to say, hey, the governor is saying that you guys could be at risk of closing. Like, what's going on? Like, can you guys provide any clarity? And in their statement, they said, well, we don't know anything about that yet. We certainly do not intend to close, but they did cite financial uncertainty as like a real challenge moving ahead.
As far as the $50 billion federal rural health fund goes, Donny Lambeth agrees with critics that
it's a drop in the bucket of what's really needed.
And it's simply not enough to keep rural health care rolling like it has been since Medicaid expansion came to town.
Now, what's the consequences of that probably are some more limited services in rural areas, maybe even some that convert from inpatient just to an outpatient site.
Lambeth also cites telehealth as a way to offer low-cost care to rural communities. But ultimately, he says, acquisition by bigger hospitals and networks may be the only way for rural hospitals to survive.
It's a free market, and there will be, I think, continued takeovers by the big hospitals. And when you get down to it, the little hospitals that are trying to survive probably don't have much choice. I think in 10 years, you really won't see any independent rural hospitals. They'll all be owned or operated by a bigger system.
North Carolina lawmakers are currently hashing out the state budget. Whether it'll include a plan to deal with Medicaid's new rules remains to be seen. And they also need to figure out how to fund current Medicaid services. So Lambeth has a lot on his plate right now.
The governor's calling me. He probably want to talk about Medicaid.
But as lawmakers focus on the checkbook, medical providers are looking at the forecast and bracing for what's ahead.
We're very much in a wait and see. You know, what is going to actually happen? No idea.
Tim Evans is the CEO of a physicians network in Western North Carolina, the Mountain Community Health Partnership. And Western North Carolina, as he brought up, is still struggling from Hurricane Helene. He told me that, this uncertainty almost feels like another storm on the horizon.
We have done a good job of putting cash away, and we really made that a focus so that we could weather a storm. We didn't know that the storm would be coming from Washington as much as from Helene.
And I really like that metaphor because it does seem right now like the clouds are gathering over North Carolina hospitals and doctors and clinics. I think one difference from Helene is that at least this is a storm that we can see coming. We have sort of a runway to try to prepare or to try to come up with something that could stave the storm off. But it does feel like it's a little inevitable right now. And so I think it really is up to our lawmakers and the health system to try to prepare for this and come up with something before the storm hits.
If you'd like to check out more of Nick de la Canal's reporting, we've dropped a link in our show notes. This episode of The Broadside was produced by Charlie Shelton Ormond and edited by Jared Walker. Our executive producer is Wilson Sayre. The Broadside is a production of WUNC North Carolina Public Radio and is part of the NPR network. If you have feedback or a story idea, you can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. I'm Anissa Khalifa. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.
September, CBS hits are streaming free on Pluto TV.
I'm coming in hot.
For this month only, stream full episodes of Matlock.
I'm a lawyer, like the old TV show.
Fire Country, Elsbeth.
I do love a mystery.
NCIS Origins, Watson, and Ghosts.
What the hell?
This is the most amazing sight I've never seen.
All for free. The CBS shows you love, this month only on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.